You should say I'm with ILV too.
Oh, I will. Okay. Welcome. We are now live. Sorry, we had a little technical difficulty that we're coming in late now. But welcome to the Authenticity Erased and Replaced live stream. You'll understand a little bit more around that title here shortly. But before we get there, let me introduce who we have on our panel today. We have Erec Smith, who is a professor of rhetoric at York College. He is an author. He is the co-founder of Free Black Thought. He is a part of many movements, including the Heterodox Academy, FAIR, and the Institute for Liberal Values, which is co-sponsoring this along with Free Black Thought, as well as Counterweight. We also have Angel Eduardo with us. Angel is a writer. He is a artist, and he is also what I like to think of the king of star manning. And we have Zander Keig. And Xander is a first generation American of Mexican heritage, and he is an award winning social worker as well as a transsexual man. I'm Jennifer Richmond. I am the co-founder of the Institute for Liberal Values. I am the founder of Truth in Between and the host of the Hold My Drink podcast. I'll be moderating today along with David Bernstein, who is the executive director of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values and also the co-founder of the Institute for Liberal Values. So with no further ado, David, take us away.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you all here to talk about such an important topic, one that you really don't hear a lot about in the public sphere. Authenticity, and what does it mean? And particularly in this moment, it seems that this very idea of authenticity cuts against the grain of both sort of woke culture on the left and populist culture on the right. And we have an opportunity to sort of stake our claim for authenticity here today. So why don't I start with Angel? When you think of authenticity, when you talk about authenticity, what do you mean by that?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with Erec and Xander. I haven't actually gotten a chance to meet Xander yet, so it's great to cohabitate some virtual space. Authenticity to me has, it was difficult to articulate before when I was younger, growing up and kind of struggling with my own sense of self versus everyone else's kind of projection of what I was supposed to be or who I was supposed to be or how I was supposed to be, from, uncles of mine saying, why don't you play baseball? You're supposed to play baseball. To, peers of mine saying, why don't you listen to this music? That sort of stuff. For me, authenticity means being true to yourself and expressing that being true to yourself out into the world, reflecting that truth out into the world. And I guess the conflict is that that's often going to put you into opposition with the way that you are seen, the way that you are supposed to be according to whatever subgroup is most salient in your life, if it's a racial subgroup or another kind of community that you're a part of, whatever kind of identity it is. And the centering of identity in our politics and in our culture just puts this stuff at the forefront. And I feel that there are a lot of people struggling with authenticity. But for me, ultimately, it's about being true to yourself, being honest about yourself, and kind of putting those fences up when you need them to protect yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you. Xander, what does authenticity mean to you?
Well, like Angel said, I want to say thank you for the invite, and also it's wonderful to be here with both Angel and Erec. I wanted to mention two things. So similar to Angel, as a child growing up, there were certain messages that I got from certain members of my family, in particular my paternal grandmother, where she would repeatedly ask me, why can't you be more like your cousins? Why can't you be more like your cousins? Because it was obvious that I was very, very different from my cousins. And so as a trans man, that meant I was a young girl, and I was not very feminine like my girl cousins. And there were about 6 or 7 of them. And so, I was more of a tomboy. And so I did get these messages. And then when I went to school, I started getting these messages. So it was pretty clear to me that how I wanted to be just naturally. It's not like I woke up in the morning when I was 7 and thought, how can I dress to really upset my grandmother? And how, like it was just natural for me to behave in that way. And so that's a part of the authenticity. As a trans man in the trans community, there seems to be a bit of a war going on for who has the right to claim what is an authentic lived experience as a trans person. There's these tensions between binary and non-binary, trans men and trans women, the younger and the older set. And so now what's happening is there's really a lot of policing of authenticity going on. So it's, for me, it's like I can, my early life, it's exactly the same thing. It's like I was who I was being myself, and that was a problem to everybody around me. And now I'm doing the same thing within the trans community, and it's causing problems for me because other people don't like it. They don't like my authenticity, even though the idea is that we're supposed to be championing authenticity because we're supposed to be living our authentic lives. That's the whole idea of being trans, is we're living our authentic lives. But I guess some of us are more authentic than others.
I like that idea of policing of authenticity. We should talk more about it. Erec, what about you?
Well, in true professor fashion, I'm going to answer that question by quoting someone else. Last week, my students and I went over Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance, which is all about authenticity. And every paragraph has some kind of axiom that would work here, but I'm just going to randomly choose this one as an explanation of what I think is authenticity. Emerson writes, "What I must do is all that concerns me, not what the people think. This rule, equally arduous in actual and in intellectual life, may serve for the whole distinction between greatness and meanness. It is the harder because you will always find those who think they know what is your duty rather than you know it. It is easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great man is he who, in the midst of the crowd, keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude." Right? That is a very fancy way of saying to be authentic is to be yourself regardless of what other people think of you or want from you. And that's how I do it. And that's how I've done it for quite some time. However, there is a definition of authenticity out there that reminds me of method acting, right? The Stanislavski method. And what I mean by that is, if we are abiding by a narrative, and there are certain people in the anti-racist community who are abiding by a narrative, then people are being cast into certain roles, pre-made roles for them. And to be authentic is to embody that role, right? To method act, to never break character, right? And that's what people expect from you. And in my field, among rhetoricians and social linguistics professors, there's a term called identity kit. It's how do you embody the values, attitudes, and beliefs of a particular narrative? How can you, internalize that and act it out in the world? An identity kit. To be authentic is to acquire the right identity kit, and that right identity kit is a pre-made role that we are all casting.
Very powerful. So Angel, you found yourself sort of a target of controversy recently when you wrote a piece in Newsweek sort of expressing your authenticity in a way that put you at odds with sort of the current identitarian moment. Talk a little bit about what happened, what you argued, and what was the response.
Sure. Yeah. So it was a piece for Newsweek, and I'd like to give a shout out to Batia Ungar-Sargon for all her help with that piece. It was tough. It was a tough needle to thread. But the argument isn't really that complicated. So I just made a few statements, basically. In the beginning was, I've been accused of being white many, many times in my life. And it's happened since, middle school. That time where everyone is kind of trying to figure themselves out. And that's where a lot of the cliquish sort of behavior really starts to kick in. And I was really, really bad at it. So I wanted desperately to be accepted by everyone and anyone, right? But I was bad at it. I stuck out. I wasn't very good at that sort of assimilation, right? Being cool was not easy for me. I couldn't do it. Being liked was not easy for me, right? I had very, very few friends, but I wanted desperately to be accepted. And the one kind of tactic that I instinctively took was, well, all these Dominicans and Puerto Ricans and Cubans, right? We're basically the same. They have to accept me, right? Like, if anyone's going to, they are, right? And so I tried my best to hang out with this cohort, but there were things about me personally that just didn't work, right? And there were these things that were called white. The music that I listened to, I loved Queen and Led Zeppelin, and I tried desperately to like the music that they were listening to, which was the late 90s hip hop stuff, and I couldn't relate to it. I couldn't connect to it. The way I dressed was white, and the way I spoke was white. So they talked, but I spoke, right? It's just the way that it was. My lexicon was different. And they didn't intend to bully me or harm me with that. It's just it was kind of a statement of fact as far as they were concerned, right? But what it did for me was push me away. What it did for me was separate me. And no matter how hard I tried to be the authentic version of whatever it was, it didn't work. And so I've experienced that a lot, and other people have as well. From Barack Obama to Coleman Hughes to all these people. They've heard the thing of, you're acting white if you ABC. And so I had to, dealing with that growing up. And then I noticed that it took on a different quality. It was the same sort of thing, but it took on a different quality as I was an adult, where now it's more of a political thing. There are political opinions you're supposed to have if you have a certain amount of melanin, or if you are of a certain ancestry. You're supposed to think a certain way. You're supposed to be a certain way in the world. You're supposed to see the world a certain way. And if you don't, then you get called white, or you get called white adjacent, or you get called, all these other horrible things. And I noticed it with my particular perspective on race, where, I was filling out a sign-up form for a workshop that I was signing up for, and instead of the usual multiple choice for the race question, they had a blank field, and so I just wrote human. And the response that I got when I pointed this anecdote out to people was, oh, of course this white guy is obviously going to say human because, so I've been thinking about that a lot, and I came up with a term. I called it the one thought rule, and it's basically if you think one single thing outside of what is considered the orthodoxy by people who deem themselves the authority on whatever group you're a part of, your membership in the group is immediately questioned and or just taken from you, right? Just for thinking the wrong thing. And so I highlighted this kind of bullying, this kind of in-group gatekeeping, and I said that it's pervasive and it's pernicious and it's disgusting to me. But I think this is the thing that really got people, is that I took one further step of saying, you know what? I don't even want your group affiliation. I don't want any of it. I'm out. I'm out of all your groups. I'm out of all your tribes. I don't want to be in any of your boxes, and especially not the race box, because race is garbage. It's nonsense. It's fugazi, and I don't want to pretend it's real anymore. And so you can call me whatever you want to call me, but I reject the entire premise. So that's going to upset a lot of people whose race identity is core to their being, or if they feel that it's this very, very important aspect of who they are, or at least how they're seen and how they're treated. I'm taking that extra step of saying, you know what, you can see me however you want, but it's not going to affect how I see myself. And I'm not white or black or brown or anything. I'm Angel. I'm a human being. I have, the culture that I have and the background that I have, but this race thing, I'm out.
One of the people who did take exception to you was Nicole Hannah-Jones. in a tweet. You mentioned her in your article, and our friend Erec Smith there also wrote a piece further defending the ideas. Erec, what was your take on all this?
Well, when I saw the response to Angel's article about authenticity and not wanting to be labeled at all, let alone by race, I was reminded of things that had happened to me. It's interesting when you are seen as just a quote unquote regular person, right, and who is not acting correctly in some kind of ethnic pre-made fashion, right? You're just dismissed. You know, you're rejected to some degree. You know, you're insulted to some degree. But when you are that person with a modicum of ethos, with some kind of prominence, then you have to be erased. You're too dangerous to the narrative. You got to go. And because I can't really make you go, I'm just going to pretend you're somebody else now. Somebody so absurd, right, that they can't be taken seriously. And that's what I saw Nicole Hannah-Jones and her fans on Twitter doing to Angel. It's been done to me as well, more than once, to the point where this seems like a standard tactic, a strategy for shutting up people who are hard to silence, right? Like a Black man who is not on board with many aspects of contemporary anti-racism. You know, you can't just call me racist. I mean, you can, but that's not as powerful as if you do it to a white person. So if you're me, then you have to be erased and replaced. And that's why I use that term in the article. Who I am has to be rubbed out and replaced with a moron who's easy to beat in an argument. And I saw that and it angered me, and I ended up writing things. I was telling my students the other day, just don't avoid bad emotions, channel them. If you're angry, don't push it down. Just channel that into something productive. And I did that with a Newsweek article. I did it with my last book. You know, I wrote that because people pissed me off. You know, anger can be a good thing. But honestly, this has been an issue in my life for quite some time. I have a similar childhood experience to Angel's, not exactly the same, but similar. So I know exactly what he's talking about, and I've experienced this a lot, and I am sick of it.
So, Xander, you've also gotten some interference in your projection of authenticity within your own community, within the trans community. I'll let you sort of decide how much you want to share of that, but it'd be interesting to hear how that plays out in your life now.
Absolutely. I mean, just to go back a little bit, my experience is similar as a young person, as far as I definitely was not the right kind of Mexican kid either, right? Because I was, all the things I was into, whether it was what I wore, what I listened to, what I ate, was clearly not. And I also don't speak Spanish, so that was a big problem. But one of the things, and I really resonated with Erec, what you said about how it's really, when you get right down to it, it's a gift that's been given to us. Because this non-conformity that I have is a true gift, because I've used it my whole life through. I'm 55 years old now. I've used it my whole life through as almost like a badge of honor that I don't conform. And it has helped me through. I think it's part of my resiliency. It's part of what makes me feel stronger in the world, not weaker. And so that just to encapsulate, that's where I'm coming from. Now, within trans community, again, I've been involved in the trans community for about 20 years, and it's only more recently that this has become an issue. And I had mentioned earlier about policing authenticity, and what I mean by that, and it's interesting, Erec, that you mentioned the performative authenticity with method acting, because there is this concept within gender studies called performance, like gender performativity, championed by Judith Butler, a rhetoric professor at UC Berkeley. And so right? I don't know exactly what the idea is because it's too complicated for me to even fully glean. But people try and talk about it, and what I gather is what the way people use it, and I don't know if this is the original intention, that someone like me is performing being a man in society. And I don't necessarily outright disagree with that if what you mean is I'm taking testosterone, I have a deep voice and a beard, and I walk around the planet and people think I'm a man. Is that performing? I don't know. I felt more like I was performing woman before transition, that because this is more natural to me, this kind of masculinity. But the kinds of things that I hear that are similar to the kinds of things I heard as a young person, but around gender, it's very academic sounding language. And so this is part of the issue too, is a lot of this is coming out of the academy. So though people will use words towards me like I reinforce heteronormativity, right? Like, because I live in the world as a man, I'm married to a woman, so now I'm reinforcing something that's problematic, something that should be erased and replaced, right? The family, marriage. So even with gay and lesbian people that were fighting for same-sex marriage, not all members of the LGBT community wanted same-sex marriage. Some people really loathe the concept of family and the structure of family and how much attention family gets in our society. And then also there's this idea of I'm a cis-passing trans man, right? Because I have to actually knock people over and say, I'm a trans man, because they're not going to believe me otherwise. And so now I'm passing, right? Passing for white was a thing. Now it's passing for cisgender. And so that's considered a negative thing. It's like living my authentic self was taking medication so that I could live this life. And now that I'm here, now it's a problem, right? It's like this really bizarre thing of we're only authentic as long as we stay androgynous, or as long as we stay maybe very visibly, like I bet it would be more acceptable for me to take on a more effeminate male gender expression. I bet that would buy me a little bit more flexibility and room in my community if I were less masculine, if I was a little more effeminate, and maybe partnered with men, right? It's like, so there's this really interesting thing that happens. And now this idea of toxic masculinity, that's definitely something that I've heard, levied in my direction. But as far as erasure goes, I mean, something that happened to me really recently is I briefly affiliated with a transgender organization that has taken up pretty unpopular points of view around things that have to do with transition in children in particular. And so within 24 hours of being affiliated with that organization publicly, a letter was sent to an organization, a global organization that I'm very involved with, asking for me to be removed from positions of not authority, it's not authority, but from involvement, my involvement with the organization. I have lost one paying contract. I've heard that there are people who have sent letters trying to get my licensed clinical social work license revoked, because I'm now seen as not gender affirming. It's like that doesn't make any sense to me. Sort of like you can call Erec a racist, but it doesn't have the same sting. Calling me transphobic or non-gender affirming just doesn't have the same sting. It's like, I don't understand what you're saying. I'm a trans person, right? So it's different, of course, but there's some interesting overlaps around these issues.
I'm wondering if those of us you're seeing now are just strange. We're strange because when we speak of authentic, what we mean is we don't fit very well into society, and we notice our lived experience, if you will, is such that we feel like we're fish out of water, and eventually we contend with that and project that into the world, and then get in trouble with our peers, with our others in our identity categories. And what really are examples of people who don't fit in well, and that it's a really distinct personality type in a way.
Absolutely.
It's just a thesis. I could be wrong, and I'm sure I'm simplifying. But any of you want to tackle that, Erec? What do you think
about the fact that we're weirdos?
Yeah.
Well, I mean that accurately describes me, I guess. I'm not by any means a normal person. But when it comes to race and authenticity and things like that, as bothered as I was by rejection as a kid, I never wanted to conform to them. I felt like that would be losing something. Counterfeit, forfeiting rather, who I am, or this game of authenticity I was playing. So I guess I embraced, my inner weirdo. And, when I was 18, I come across Emerson's Self-Reliance. I'm like, oh, okay, this guy's a prominent person in society and he feels the same way. I feel better now, right? So I start to embrace this weirdo-ness, and it's become kind of who I am. If I had a dime for everybody who looked at me and said, I've never met anybody like you, I mean, I'd be a very rich person. And so I don't know if it's always just a statement or an insult or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but I hear that a lot. And it's because, other people abide by narratives too, if only marginally or tacitly. They abide by narratives, and I don't seem to fit into theirs either.
Right.
So,
But does it strike anybody else as strange that here we are being accused of violating the norms of diversity? And what's really happening is that it's a definition of diversity that wants to shut out people who just happen to be a little weird and want to articulate a different position in the world. I'll add to my original comment on weirdness. Angel.
Yeah, I mean, I think Barbara Fields just perfectly encapsulated it. The whole thing of that, what's really being sought out with the diversity thing is a bunch of people who look different but think the same. And that's not going to work for me. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we're that weird. I mean, Xander mentioned Square Pegs, right? This TV show. A lot of people have to watch a TV show for a TV show to stay on, right? Freaks and Geeks. There's all this media about, outcasts. I mean, all comic books. It's, all the comic book stuff that I loved growing up. It's about the dorky kid who doesn't fit in, the guy who feels weird. X-Men is all outcasts. It's all about outcasts. It's all about these people who don't feel like they fit in with the norm. I feel like it's a kind of sort of imposter syndrome. Everyone thinks that they're the weirdo, and it just turns out that we're all weirdos, and none of us fit this idea, but some of us maybe are better at appearing to fit, right? And I have a hypothesis that maybe those of us who really, really feel, who seem to fit the mold and they seem like they've got it all together, they're just the best actors of all of us, right? They're just the best method actors. They've got it down and they've fooled us. But deep inside, they're terrified, and they have the imposter syndrome too. I don't know. I feel like we're all weird. A friend of mine when I was growing up used to say, if you're not weird, you're not normal. And I think it's true. I just think, there's an element of bravery when it comes to, what Erec was saying. Like, I'm not going to forfeit myself for you. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let you win by bullying me into compliance and conformity, right? I had to work my way up to that because I desperately wanted to fit in. I desperately wanted to just disappear into the crowd and just be a part of everything and not feel that isolation, right? I had to become comfortable with it. And eventually I developed this kind of thing of, fuck them, fuck that. Don't do that. And when I see people struggling with it, I get very animated, and I try to guide them, because don't take the long path that I took. Get straight to the fuck them part, because that's the best place to be.
I'd like to invite viewers to ask questions. There's some great comments here. Love to get some questions as well.
David, can I say something about this,
sure.
this weirdo thing?
Yeah.
For about 4 years, I was a volunteer facilitator with a national organization called the National Conference for Community and Justice. It used to be the National Conference for Christians and Jews. It was founded in 1927, and they have a program called Anytown, where you bring high school kids together over the course of like maybe an extra long weekend. And there was this one day, usually around maybe the second half of the second day, they would ask everybody to break up into culture groups. And what they wanted the kids to do is break up into these culture groups and then put together some programming about their culture that they would share with all the other kids. And so this was in Broward County, by the way, which is a very, very diverse county in Florida. There's like 50 different languages spoken in the high school alone. Like, it's very diverse. And so they broke up, all the kids would break up into these little groups, and they'd be working on their projects. And I would usually hang back, and I learned this the very first time to do this, is I would hang back and I would notice that this kid would sort of walk away from that culture group, and this kid would walk away from that culture group, and all of a sudden you'd have like these little straggler kids. And so I'd go round up the stragglers and I would say, hey, are you intending to go back to your culture group? And they'd be like, no, that's not really for me. And I was like, and I would talk to them about what it was that wasn't gelling with them, it's like, well, you're a Dominican kid, that's a Dominican group, or you're a Jamaican kid and that's a Jamaican group, you're a Cuban kid, right? Because you would think that maybe people would think like maybe all the white kids were walking around going, I don't know what culture I am, but they figured it out, right? They went into Italians and Irish and, German kids, but there were always these kids, and it would be the only group that had the most diversity around race and ethnicity. And I would give them a good couple of hours to kind of stew in it. Like, they were really worried about what's wrong with me. And I wanted them to talk to each other. And then I would invite them to just consider that maybe they did have a culture after all, that they were the counterculture group. And they would be like, what's that? And then I would tell them about all of these countercultural efforts around the world throughout time. And that was it. Then all of a sudden, the one kid who was the poet would write a poem. And so they would start doing things, and they would go and do research on these, countercultural people in history from their culture or any culture. And then they would present to all these kids about counterculture. I got to tell you, it was almost always the favorite cultural group of the night. Because they were thinking for themselves. And a lot of these other kids, I think it was Angel who said, I think he's right. A lot of these other kids, they just went into their little culture groups. They didn't question it. They didn't know to question it. They were afraid to question it. They just did it because that's what you're supposed to do. And these kids were brave enough to stand up and stand out from that whole group. We're talking like 100 kids at a sleepaway camp. I mean, it's not like they were going to be able to just cut and run and go home. So it's, there's something about that this countercultural narrative, it's out there. Kids are doing it, adults are doing it. We've been doing it throughout time. So we just have to embrace that. But it's harder as a kid to embrace that because social pressure really, really is important at that age, getting along with everybody. And not me, I didn't really care, but
Okay. There was a college student or a recent grad who we had on a webinar the other day who talked about his experience with something he called the progressive stack. This is where he was in a group and were asked to put themselves in line in responding to the question of the day based on where they were in sort of the identity matrix. Who had the least power would be able to speak first. So if you were Black and gay, you would rise in the progressive stack compared to somebody else per se. And of course, there are serious problems with this. I think we would probably agree on what they are. But it seems that in a way, what might be happening here is that people want to maintain that progressive stack in society. They want to impose it on society, and we're here to say that's not a complete explanation. That you can't define me in your progressive stack. I'm not going to allow you to tell me how much power I have, how much agency I have, based on your preconceived notions. Am I wrong? Are we defining ourselves against that external that imposed notion that there is this power structure and we're supposed to fit into it in a certain way?
Well, when I listen to what you just said, I think about the concept of projection and how when people look at me and see that I'm not behaving in ways that they deem appropriate, they think about themselves acting that way. And if they were to act like me, well, they would be being phony, right? So that must mean I'm being phony. Because there's no way, you know, a person who looks like me can act and care about those things. And I remember Angel talking about sense of humor even, right? So they just assume that I lack integrity and that I'm trying to conform and please people. And the fact that I am being as authentic as I can possibly be doesn't occur to them, or they don't want it to occur to them. A lot of this is willful ignorance as well. I don't know if that answers your question or if I hijacked your question.
That's all right.
That's something that I wanted to say.
You asked a better one.
Okay.
Or you answered a better one. Others thoughts on either the way I framed it or the way that Erec framed it?
Yeah,
well, you made me think of in the 90s in college, we used to say the oppression Olympics.
Yeah.
I
Right.
still
like
say it.
So like at the time, I think mostly what I would hear people say is that, the top of the list would be like the Black, bisexual, disabled Jewish woman or something, like we were trying to figure out like who would be the winner of this oppression Olympics. And so I think this idea of having a stack, I think, what's his name? The person the creator of Dilbert uses that idea of a stack, a talent stack. So I wonder if he's also talking, if they're using that same kind of languaging or if it's something that he came up with. Scott Adams, that's it.
Yeah, I suspect that he is using that concept. Angel.
I mean, I think it's kind of a feedback loop, right? It's people, maybe they're threatened by how free somebody else appears to them, how non-conforming someone else appears to them, or they're confused. It's frightening to them. Like how could you possibly, you're destroying all my priors behaving this way. You're messing me up. Now I have to reassess things because I can't just put you in a box. I get that a lot. A lot of people, as Erec said, a lot of people tell me I've never met anyone quite like you, right? And there's also the thing of, if people make assumptions based on one or two characteristics, they're going to miss, the whole chunk of the iceberg that's underwater when it comes to me, right? If they think they know me because I'm Dominican, they're not going to know very much, right? If they think they know me because I'm in a band, they're not going to know very much. If they think they know me because I'm a writer, they're not going to know me very well, right? It's all these things, right? And I think it's well-intentioned, the whole, the stacking thing. I think it's well-intentioned. We want to correct iniquities. We want to make the world a better place. And one thing that we know happened in the past is that certain people from certain groups were cast out, they were marginalized, they were silenced. And so we want to reverse that. So we're going to take all of those people and make sure they get to speak first, right? But in doing that, they oversimplify and they essentialize. And they would put somebody like me towards the front of the line when I don't really need to be toward the front of the line. I've never had trouble speaking. I've never had trouble voicing my opinion, right? So I would opt out of being in front of the line. I would give it to somebody else. And that somebody else might be a white guy who comes from, a very low socioeconomic status place, and nobody's ever paid attention to him. Like, who knows, right? But I think it's a well-intentioned thing, but it's oversimplified by necessity, because in order to systematize things, you have to simplify. You can't have so many cogs and things moving at the same time, right? So we're just going to go, okay, look, we're just going to line you up by melanin. We're just going to line you up by perceived oppression based on ancestry. That's the easiest way to do this. And we're just trying to get stuff done. But you end up erasing people. You end up essentializing. You end up, missing so much of who people are when you do that sort of thing.
But this wasn't supposed to happen. We entered the internet age, and we were told about the long tail of demand. In other words, you could really put any product into the marketplace. You can put yourself out there. You can get your own webpage, your own platform, and develop it. And there's the possibility of almost infinite individualization in this current social economy that we live in today. And you would think in this environment, we'd be moving toward a politics of individuality, maximum individuality, and I see some of that, at least in the current stew out there. I see some of it where, people can dress more freely than they used to. People can talk differently. They can have their own sense of style in ways that, like in the 1980s when I was growing up, you couldn't. Yet at this very time, there's this unbelievable pressure to conform to these identity categories. And I don't understand how those two things are coexisting. Maybe one of you can help me out.
Well, human nature is a bitch, like we desperately want to be in groups. We want to belong. We're social creatures. That's what so we want to be individuals together. That's what ends up happening, right? So you wanted to dress this way, and now you're free to dress this way, but you're not just satisfied with that. You want to find other people who dress this way, and now we dress this way. And it's great that you're free to do it, right? And it's cool to meet people who like the same things and do the same things. It's great. But I think it's just it's a necessity of political action, right? You need to cluster in order to if it was literally just billions of individuals trying to move things politically, you're going to cluster anyway. It's just the way it works. So I think then people try to harness the clustering, and then they try to reverse engineer it and try to I think it's an inevitable thing in that sense, right? But I think that we take it too far, right? I understand the need for group affiliation when it comes to we all agree about this policy and let's all vote for this policy or advocate for this policy together. But we take it too far to the point where it's like, well, now you need to agree with all these tenets or else you can't even possibly be a part of the group. We get too precious about it, I think.
So we're getting some questions in now, and I'm going to ask one from a good friend, Paul Rossi, who many of you have heard about. Paul said, do you think racial de-identification is a viable strategy to progress in dismantling race and rendering it as meaningless in society as eye color? What are the counter arguments to this strategy? Erec, you want to start?
No, but I will. The counter arguments to that strategy is that a lot of race overlaps with ethnicity and culture and things like that. And people, embrace that for good reasons. So it's not easy to just say we're going to transcend race. I mean, I feel like I can do that, but, I'm cognizant enough of society to know that there are people out there who, for good and often healthy reasons, embrace their ethnicity and their culture and run with it, and it fulfills them. So I don't want to put it out there that we should all transcend ethnicity, right? I don't like the fact that somebody would look at me and see, my race first and foremost. I forget who said this. I think it was John McWhorter who said, my skin color is the least interesting thing about me. So for that reason, I would like to transcend race and things like that. But it's tricky when you think about the overlap of race and ethnicity.
Great. I'm going to let Jennifer go ahead and ask some questions here.
Yeah, so we've got a question from Amir Zaki. He says, can any of you address this idea of representation matters? As in, people have been told and then repeat that they need to see someone that looks like them in a position of power to be role models.
May I? Oh, sorry.
Yes, please.
Well, I wrote an article about this for Heterodox a few months ago. I tried to put it in the comments, but it won't let me. I put it in the private chat instead. But in that article, my thesis statement, if you will, is wanting representation can be a good thing. Needing it, is a sign of disempowerment. Right? I don't need somebody to look like me to do it. If I want to do something, I'm going to do it. Right? I understand the dignity, I guess, that comes with seeing people who look like you or seeing people that with whom you can identify. But it's not a necessity for me. And, I'm proud of that.
Yeah, I agree. I've written about this as well, most controversially with a post that I wrote about is called "Does Superman Have to Be White?" And it's talking about this whole idea of, I got it a lot growing up. Like, I've heard mumblings of, oh, we're gonna make Superman, a black guy, and isn't that great? Like, aren't you gonna like it even more now? And I'm like, why on earth would that make it anything? Why would that matter? Like, I already love Superman. I identified with him already. I identified with him as a human being, as a character, right? The qualities of the character. I think that there's an unnecessary and a kind of counterproductive superficiality that people apply to the idea of representation, right? So on the one hand, yes, of course, we live in a society where, for the vast majority of it, in media and television and movies and all that sort of stuff, all but one group was left out, right? So that's something we should fix, because it makes sense for our media to reflect the landscape to which it's reflecting and giving us art, right? So we should have all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds being in all kinds of places, right? I think that's a good thing to do. But again, it's kind of a backwards thinking, and it's kind of a reverse engineering representation, like, oh, we'll fix the problem by just changing the screen instead of going deeper. I don't think that anyone should have to look like you for you to identify with them, because we're human beings. The whole point is you should be able to connect with human beings. That's the point of art from the beginning of time, is human beings connecting with each other through human emotions and human stories. So I don't need Superman to look like me. And I'm not a huge stickler about that sort of thing, but it's insulting, the idea that I'm supposed to like him more, or that I will like him more if they change him to look more like me. That's insulting, because there's so much more to it. It's such a superficial idea. So, on the one hand, yeah, there are things we need to correct because people have been left out. So anybody who's been systematically or historically left out of the conversation should be let in. That's good. But this whole thing of trying to fix that problem by kind of, just tweaking a few dials and, oh, hey, look, great, everything's great now. Like, that doesn't work. That doesn't do anything.
So I got another question. Do we think there's a subset of vocal and influential Black identitarians who are living out a misplaced contrition for not being Black enough as kids?
Okay, so do I understand the question correctly? Is this person asking if there are people out there, Black people who don't act Black, who feel bad about it? And
Ooh, well, I don't know that I can read into that for you.
I heard it as people who maybe got that when they were younger and are now overcompensating.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
That's how I heard that. But I guess both is true.
Yeah, right. I mean, answer either way, and if there's any update to that, I will let you know.
If there are people out there who are acting like, for lack of a better term, hyper Black, in order to make up for their not Black enough status as a child, then take a deep breath. Know that we're out there. Contact me, man. If you're close, we'll have a drink together and discuss this. It sounds like you need a drink. But other than that, I don't really know.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you, I wanted to bring this up earlier, but I can tell you that after I wrote that Newsweek piece, I've gotten so many emails and so many messages from people of all ages. So someone, in their 60s to someone who's a teenager right now to someone who, has kids in college. And they're all concerned about this idea of authenticity, or, they suffered the same sort of thing of they were called not whatever enough growing up because they liked this or that. This one woman, she says she's African-American, but, she goes to Kiss concerts and, she loves that kind of music and she dresses in a kind of, Hot Topic kind of punk rock way. Right. And she got so much shit for that. And she gets weird looks from people at the concerts because, like, what are you doing here? That sort of stuff. So there's more of us than it seems, I think. And it's just everyone's just kind of quiet because it's, who wants to put the target on their back? I guess Erec and I are like, well, fuck it. Let's go. Bring it.
Yeah.
But most of us are not. Yeah.
I say one thing, and then I'll try to shut up. This isn't just, the accusations of inauthenticity don't just come from people of my race
Oh yeah.
or people of color. I mean, white people have done it to me too,
Mhm.
right? I've had people like bristle, really be upset because I have a pretty good command of the English language. They didn't like that. Standard English is a white thing, damn it, right?
Wow.
So that's happened several times. It's not just once. So it comes from all kinds of directions. So, I mean, if we can just get rid of this, there's only one or two ways to be black or anything, that would be nice.
Yeah, right. There's gatekeepers on both sides of the
On
gate.
both sides.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention really quickly something, I think it might have been Erec mentioned something about, superficial things. So superficiality, and it's this idea of identifying with somebody who looks like you. And I don't have the answer to this question, but my question that came up for me was, because of this superficiality, maybe it's that there are people who cannot see themselves when they are in the presence of somebody that is exhibiting stellar character or living out stellar values, right? So maybe they're right, like Superman is about character and values. So maybe there's something about that. Another thing that came to mind when we were talking is that I think there's also some short-sightedness in the sense that just because somebody hasn't seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? It's like, I was watching television in the 1970s. There were gay characters on TV, right? Like, there have been representations of, quote, my people, right? Hispanic, these representations have been out there. This idea about hyper blackness in the trans community, there is this theory of hyper masculinity within trans women pre-transition, that they're trying to mask that they identify as a female, or even in some gay cultures, that hyper masculinity, not the natural kind, but the kind that's put on, performed as a way to not get beat up for being targeted as a gay man. And then another thing I've had, I get a lot of crap from trans community, but where I get more of it, and it's even worse sometimes, are our, quote, allies. Our allies who take up the cause, or now they're supposed to be called accomplices, which I won't do, but right, this idea that they took a workshop and they know better, or they have a trans relative, or they have a trans partner, and so if I say something that's counter to what they've heard is correct, then they tell me not to use a word for my own self. It's like, I say transsexual. I can't even tell you how many times I've been told by trans people and non-trans people that I should never use that word. And I'm like, well, I'm going to keep using it. I also use tranny, and I will continue to use it, right? In reference to myself. So there's, there's
so much for lived experience. So much for lived experience, right?
Yeah, it's like, but what is an authentic lived experience? I mean, that's really how ridiculous we've gotten.
Oh yeah, you messed up, Xander. You had the wrong lived experience.
That's right.
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 It strikes me that most of us, at least, I don't know if I'm speaking for all of us, are actually quite rooted in some of these identity categories. Erec, you're head of Free Black Thought. I'm head of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. I clearly feel connected to my identity category in some ways. That doesn't mean I want to be bound by every viewpoint of it, or I want the rest of the world to view me only in that way and not as an individual. And are we potentially articulating a way of both belonging to an identity culture category, but also to be an individual? Is that part of our task here as weirdos, is to help find that path forward for people?
Well, for me, it's individuality first. Yeah, I mean, I know that I am a co-founder of Free Black Thought, but I'm part of that organization to show people that, not all Black people think, act, feel, the same, and that's really the purpose. So I mean, even if you want to embrace things that are stereotypically a part of your apparent race, you're making an individual choice to do that, and you're picking and choosing what you want, what you don't want, and you are being yourself. You're being self-reliant, you're being independent, you're being individual. So for me, the individuality is first and foremost.
Yeah, it has to be. Everyone reduces to an individual. I mean, even, especially like the intersectionality framework, I think that's a really helpful framework to show how everyone is at a kind of different point, but we have all these shared lines of identity that cross, but they cross uniquely at your individual dot, right? No one is exactly like you, and you're not exactly like anybody else, even though you share characteristics and histories and communities with so many people, right? I mean, if I was in some organization that was dedicated to Spanish speaking, right? Like we want to focus on speaking Spanish and teaching Spanish and all that sort of stuff. And if I was seen only as a Spanish speaker, that wouldn't tell you anything about me, pretty much, right? It tells you almost nothing. That doesn't mean I'm not part of that organization. Doesn't mean that's not a part of who I am. I am. But there's also the thing of just my friend Rock on Twitter. He said, he's gotten the thing many times where like, oh, black people don't do that when he's standing right there doing the thing that they're saying. And he's like, well, black people do that because I'm black and I'm doing it. So black people do this, right? That's all it takes is the one person for it to now be a thing, right? Like you can't take being Dominican away from me. It is what it is. I come from where I come from, right? Race is a different thing because it's a whole made up construct. But as it tracks to ethnicity, there are communities and things like that, and you can't kick me out. That was the thing that I wish I noticed, that I wish I realized when I was younger, was you can't kick me out. You can't gatekeep me out of this. I'm still who I am, even if you don't think I checked the boxes, right? That the boxes are ridiculous. Who made the boxes up? Fuck your boxes, right? So.
Okay, so you guys, before we leave, we've got one more question from Paul. He asks, what advice would you give, quote, white, oh wait, I lost it here. Oh yeah, what advice would you give white people pressure to identify as authentically white by admitting privilege and bias when, if they don't, they're told they're racially ignorant and irresponsible? Who wants to take that? Eric, you're laughing, so you go.
Okay. Well, the problem is that in certain anti-racist ideologies, white people are always already guilty, right? So there's that. So if you wanted to say something like, you're compelling me to say certain things because I'm white as a form of epistemic violence, right? Epistemic silencing, or smothering, as one academic says it. That could work for me. For you, it's just like, well, I can't be violent to you because you're the white person. I can't be racist, right? I can't be violent. Only you can be. So that's the trap of that. And I guess my answer to your question is, I don't know. But that was a long-winded way to answer it, so that I at least seem like I'm thinking.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, if it's Paul Rossi, I mean, Paul Rossi already had a great sort of counter, when he was accused of expressing white opinions. He just asked, what is a white opinion? What makes it white? And just let people, give them the rope and let them hang themselves with that ridiculous kind of idea of like, wait, because I just made sense? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's why people don't, that's why it's hard to have a conversation.
Right.
Or set up a quote unquote debate, not even a real formal debate, right? It's hard to do that because they know the things they say won't stand up to scrutiny. Right. It doesn't have to, because their point, listen, you need reason and rationality to build something. You don't need it to destroy something.
Yeah.
You need, brute force, a wrecking ball, right? And they fashion themselves wrecking balls of sorts.
Right. Well, ask more questions. I think the Socratic method is very effective, because when something doesn't make sense, it does not withstand questioning, repeated questioning, genuine, sincere questions. Like, I don't understand. I really don't understand. So you want me to admit to something? What if I don't have an example of it? What if What if I happen to be poor? What happened if I grew up poor and I actually didn't have any privilege? What do I do then? And then, you just talk in circles and you get lost because there's just no logic really backing any of this up. It's all based on axioms that are just accepted. Like, we just have to, the axiom is white people are privileged. The axiom is you are an oppressor. So it's just about finding out how you're an oppressor, right? But you can just question the axiom. Just be like, well, hold on a second. I don't understand that. Can you explain how that is a done deal already? And maybe just, be very sincere in your questioning and trying to understand it and keep repeating it back to them. And if they don't agree, they're like, okay, so I don't get it yet, and ask another question.
So we were going to end there, but we have a question from David Brooks. I don't know if it's the David Brooks from the New York Times, but let's take it. Race and ethnicity have become totally conflated. You can say Clarence Thomas is white only in a world where there is no longer a distinction between race and class. Any final thoughts?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we need to decouple that. I think there's a way we have to work harder to show people that there is a way to get past the nonsense of race, the racecraft, which is a book you all should read. There's a way to get past that without losing any of the things that we value, right? The community and the history and the art and the sense of self and all those things that belong to you and that we're kind of mistakenly putting in the wrapping of race. We can keep all that. All we're doing is just decoupling it from this really disgusting and divisive concept that we don't need anymore. And recognizing that insofar as it seems to track with ethnicity, and if you get into the realm of genetics, insofar as it seems to track in that kind of thing with, genetic populations and whatnot, it's an illusion. It's by coincidence. And there are many, many ways in which it doesn't track. It doesn't track at all. And it makes no sense, right? So if I subdivided the world right now based on what top they're wearing, right? So button downs, t-shirts, tank tops, dresses, no shirt, right? And then I just start administering tests. I'll find correlations. I'll find discrepancies. I'll find groups and clusters, right? And it'll give the illusion that this categorization is real, that it makes any sense to use as any kind of human taxonomy, but it doesn't. It's an illusion, and we can break it, and we'd be so much better off.
Well, thank you all very much for this very authentic conversation today. I hope we modeled the very concept that we wanted to talk about and flesh out, and to be continued, I'm sure. Thank you all for joining us, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks everyone for attending.